what I'm going to run everybody through is, who is Santos, why Lustre at Santos, and then Phil will be taking us through the implementation, the technical architecture, and what that actually looks like. And so, on the previous slide, we were seeing the topic of the talk is actually, the title of the talk is called Mission Critical Lustre at Santos, and that's because Santos, for those that don't know who Santos is the South Australian Northern Territory oil search, which is one of Australia's first and largest oil and gas exploration companies, based in Adelaide in South Australia, and predominantly made its mark, I believe, in the Cooper Basin in Australia. So, largest employer in South Australia, very strong Unix team, and very large team of geoscientists right across the organisation. We're obviously trying to find new ways to identify, find, and then extract oil and gas. And then back, one of the more challenging things, as we all know, in the more recent economy, is that oil prices are at an all-time low, I believe. So one of the problems facing Santos has been, well, how do you actually maintain IT infrastructure that's innovative and leading edge, that is also very affordable and not going to be impacted by those dropping oil prices. So the initial requirements for Santos were pretty straightforward, actually. We were contacted by Santos, as were a number of other vendors, back around 2 years ago. Santos had a production high-performance computing system, which consisted of a small number of compute nodes connected via 10 gig Ethernet, and then a NFS storage system that was around a fibre channel connected storage system, and it was only around 16 terabyte in size, so quite small compared to what most people in the room are used to using. And with that limitation, obviously, that limited the type of exploration, the type of data sets, and the size of the data sets, and the visualization that could actually be undertaken. Santos was also quite innovative because they were, in 2011, they were awarded the Red Hat Innovation Partner of the Year award. And as part of that, I think they actually beat Verizon and DreamWorks, I think it was, to actually receive that award. It's a global award. So they did something quite innovative, which was, they were one of the first major companies to really push open source in Australia with Red Hat, but also they used Turbo VNC to do all of their 3D rendering for their geoscientists. So effectively, in front of their HPC, they had these VDI platforms with NVIDIA GPUs running Turbo VNC that will help them to do all of their visualization, so that they're not dependent on using their desktop for all of that heavy data set and heavy rendering. So they effectively went to market and they opened up to a number of vendors that said, okay, this is what our current environment is, and we're looking for options to build a more scalable environment. So rather than going in and actually pitching a set product or a set system, Dell took a very different approach, and so we actually contracted with Santos and engaged a number of our partner organizations who are component vendors to actually work with them, and we undertook what we call an as-is-to-be document. So we reviewed the entire architecture of the Santos high-performance computing environment, looking at both the data flow, the endpoints, be it the remote sensing equipment that's generating data, right through to the workflow of the engineers and the geoscientists to take a look at the compute, the network, the storage, the archiving, etc. And so from that we came to an architecture that led us to position Lustre as the storage platform at Santos. So through that consulting engagement, we worked out that there was a pilot system needed that was actually considerably larger than the 16 terabyte NFS system that they had today. Part of the engagement in that consulting agreement we started to ask some of the geoscientists, well, what would happen to your workload if we gave you double the amount of storage capacity that you have today? And the simple response was, well, I double the resolution of my 3D visualization. So, there were obviously technical constraints that was actually holding back the business. And to Santos, that's a critical thing because they actually generate revenue based off of their high-performance computing environment. And then a large production system came out of that and a DR system. So what Phil's going to talk about next is running us through that environment, what that looks like, and what the benefits of that environment was. So I'm just going to hand it over to Phil Laxton, who's our local HPC solution architect.
Morning everybody, I know I'm between you and lunch and we've got a fairly short amount of time with a lot of information, but I joined Dell when this project had already started, the consultancy process had already started, but based on, I joined Dell as a HPC specialist and had some experience with Lustre from about 2004 with another vendor. So started to get involved in this project, and yeah, it was a very successful project, and certainly a very good story with Dell working together with the Santos guys, with Datacom, our channel partner, with Intel and with Mellanox. Obviously the Santos guys were very new to Lustre and also new to InfiniBand, so one of the things that we organised was some hands-on classroom learning for Lustre and Mellanox, which the InfiniBand, so that helped a lot with the local knowledge. But the local Santos engineers are very experienced, so they came up to speed very well. And so have a look at some of the implementations and some of the things that the engineering team, including Adam, has done since then. So as Andrew said, so we came up with the whole project plan to do basically a pilot process. So they were in desperate need of some high performance, high capacity storage for their geoscientists. So the plan was to implement a pilot system, hand that over to some of the geoscientists, and get them to start playing with it and get some feedback, and then based on that, then move into production. So after the tender process was finished, things moved pretty quickly. So it was literally a few weeks from the awarding of the tender to Dell to equipment arriving and setting up on the primary site in Adelaide. So that gave the geoscientists an opportunity to work with Lustre, but also gave the engineering support team a feel for Lustre and how it worked, and a bit of experience with InfiniBand. Santos already had a bunch of HPC servers, some Dell HPC servers, so we installed InfiniBand cards in there, set them up as Lustre clients, so that the geoscientists had some storage to use initially in this pilot phase. So we only just finished this presentation a few minutes ago, so you'll excuse me if I'm reading, but sort of put on the spot here. Also, the idea was that they had Santos had some NFS servers that they were going to use to re-export the Lustre file system as NFS to some of their system that required NFS access. No, actually, can we go back?
Just roll the middle of the mouse.
Previous. So, just an explanation of that. This is all based around Dell's reference architecture for Lustre. So, you'll see the HPC nodes up there. We base it all around our 1U PowerEdge servers and our MD storage arrays. And it's a very typical Lustre configuration with pairs of OSSs and MDS, MGS failover pairs. In this case, it's FDR and InfiniBand as the interconnect, and then a management network, and obviously the IML server, which is one of the feature adds from the Dell implementation. So the implementation of the pilot system went very well. Part of that was user acceptance test to test things like performance and failover scenarios. So we're testing all the redundancies and the performance from the clients, etc., and the NFS performance, etc. So the performance tests were above expectation, and the results of all the failure tests were as expected. The NFS servers, which were previous old generation servers from another vendor, weren't performing very well, so that was sort of tracked down to the fact that they were a fairly old CPU, so they were replaced with some newer servers, and that increased the NFS performance. There was also another issue that came up with this NFS stale file handle issue, and that was a good opportunity for the Santos guys to work directly with the Intel support group, and that was resolved, and an update from the EL 2.2 to 2.4 resolved that issue. Part of the requirement was also SMB access and NFS access to the Lustre file system. So we implemented the CTDB setup based on information from Intel. They had a white paper on how to set that up, and that was set up on a couple of servers for the SMB clients. There was some trepidation from the Santos team around some of their previous experience with things like CoroSync and Pacemaker, but it all went very well, and they then decided to use that same CTDB cluster setup for the NFS serving as well. So we have two sets of servers in a failover cluster exporting as SMB, and then there's a pair of servers exporting for the NFS clients as well. The failover, the part of the user acceptance test was testing that failover between the clients. There's obviously a small time lag while that failover happens, and then I/O continues. One of the things that the Santos guys have implemented as well is they use Puppet quite extensively in their environment for configuring servers, etc. So they wanted to use Puppet to as much as possible to implement on the Lustre configuration as well. Now, obviously, the IML server in an EL solution does a lot of the configuring of the Lustre servers, etc. So they let IML still do its stuff, but also used Puppet to install things like the clients, make sure the right packages are installed. On the clients in particular, make sure the client packages are installed, the right Lustre modules are set, the file system's mounting and all that sort of stuff. So a combination between management, between the IML server and Puppet to implement the service works very well. So Adam will be here for the next couple of days, so if we've got any technical questions around particular implementation questions, then either Andrew or myself or Adam can go into a bit more detail, because obviously we're working through things fairly quickly. One of the other things that the team at Santos did, obviously there's part of the IML, Intel Manager for Lustre, node within an EL solution is historical graphs around performance, etc. But they found that that gave you an overall performance graph, but they wanted to look at particular performance around OST, read-write traffic, just down to an individual OST, and also metadata performance as well. So they've developed some plugins for CollectD, and so they can get very detailed graphs around which OSTs are being hit, what the metadata is doing, etc. And so they can sort of drill down to individual applications, etc., and any performance issues there. Oh, sorry, I didn't click. So up here we can see the read-write performance per OST on single OSTs, and the right one is Lustre client traffic. So they've also created some custom graphs around file usage as well. So obviously this is a historical graph of the file system usage, and they obviously was filling up fairly quickly. So it was a good indication that they needed to do something. So it started sort of deleting some of the data, and so there's various sort of single pane of glass information around the Lustre file system usage and performance statistics, etc., that become quite handy.
What they did find was that we'll get onto it a bit later, but we ended up setting up two sites, so replication between the two sites with snapshotting, and part of that is creating hard links between for the individual snapshots, and found that just the hard links were taking up quite a bit of space, particularly on the MDTs, the binodes, etc. So that was something that had to be taken into account in implementing the snapshotting capability. So once the pilot system was finished and the feedback from the geoscientists was all good, we then expanded it by adding another OSS pair. So we went to 1.3 petabytes on the primary file system. Santos, we also configured Lustre to be served out via the Ethernet network as well, so that some of the clients that required NFS access could access the Lustre file system directly over Ethernet rather than InfiniBand. So that sort of saved some of the load on the NFS exporter. And with the Dell reference architecture, we get roughly around 10 to 11 gigabytes a second per OSS pair, and about 6 to 7 gigabytes a second read. So across that, we're getting sort of aggregate of about 40 and 24. There was also the requirement was also to replicate some of the production data across to a DR site. So they have another site on the other side of Adelaide. So we set up a single, completely separate Lustre file system over there, using larger disks and less OSS pairs. So replicating about half a petabyte of data across to that site. So that's, as I say, that's a completely separate Lustre solution, and that's also used for NFS serving, and backups I think happen on that side as well. Is that right? So majority of the file system on the primary side is scratch data, and they then replicate about half a petabyte process production data and on a server. Initially a 2-hour snapshotting window, but that ended up blowing out to the 6-hour snapshotting window, so they keep quite a few copies of the data file system. So then we got to the replication. So the initial plan on how to replicate Lustre between the two sites. So it was proposed that we would use the R snapshot and rsync to replicate between the two sites. So I wanted to keep multiple hard link snapshots on a 2-hourly basis at the DR site. So this was favoured over the Lustre rsync as they didn't want to replicate the whole file system, just the production data. So obviously that couldn't happen until we implemented the DR site. So there was the second site set up. Then started to run into some performance issues because there was some file systems there that had up to 30 million files, and part of that process is to walk through the file system, see what's changed, move the data over, and then update all the hard links. So there was some tuning requirements around rsync processes, hitting some performance bottlenecks there. Then with some help from the Intel guys, it
which suggested the user a utility called FPart. So basically FPart and another utility called FPsync can basically walk the file system, divide it up into smaller chunks and treat each one of those as a separate part of the file system. So you can then divide it up into however many chunks of data you like. And that improved performance quite a bit. So there was a lot of tuning that the Santos engineering team came up with to work out what the ideal number of replication servers and processors. So it was settled around about 6 concurrent processors gave me the best combination of moving the data and still not hammering the metadata server. At one stage, I won't spend too much time on this, but at one stage, based on the size of the data centre at the primary site in Adelaide and the secondary site, after much planning, it was decided that the secondary site would probably be better as the primary site, and the primary site better as the secondary site. So that was the plan. And at one stage in March earlier this year, there was a lightning strike that affected the building. The air conditioning went down. All the servers shut down after getting to certain temperature levels, which is what expected. That sort of expedited the process of swapping the data centres. But one thing to mention that the Santos guys mentioned was once the air conditioning was back on, the service just opened up, Lustre file system came up with no problems at all. So there was a few issues with some SSDs and some other storage equipment, but they were quite impressed that after this massive failure, and it happened on a Sunday, of course, so as all those things do. Yeah, the feedback we got was that just switched it all back on, it all just came up and continued to work. So from the primary pilot system, the next step was to cut over to production, and part of that was stopping all the NFS clients, performing a final rsync, updating all the auto mounts in LDAP, restarting it, and doing this on a Friday, and then waiting on coming in on Monday and seeing what the feedback was. There was no major issues. They use a variety of applications in their oil and gas research, and there were a couple of 32-bit applications that didn't like the 64-bit inodes, and then resolved by moving the direct cluster client handles the 32-bit system calls. So it all went very well. Went smoother than expected. We did find that there was one application that is quite metadata heavy, so it was doing 6.6 million stat system file calls, and these were, when we ran that on a direct Lustre client, it was just hammering the metadata server and causing performance issues, and was performing worse than it used to run on the old NFS server. So that particular application was moved so that it mounts the file system via NFS, and that resolved that issue to a certain degree. Obviously, it's not ideal, but as Adam said, it's important to, when you start analysing the applications to that degree, you start to realise how some of these applications are not particularly good at accessing file systems. But the majority of the applications are obviously performing much better on the Lustre file system, and everybody seems pretty happy. So the plans for the future is obviously an upgrade to EL3 at some stage, with possibly a move to a D&E environment to give that metadata performance a bit of a boost. There was some discussion around changing the on-net peer credits to reduce the load and increase the performance on on the replication issues that they were seeing. They'd also like to look at Underwood to not necessarily, well, it gives you a record of the file system changes, but also gives you a good database of what files are in your system, and a good way to analyse what sort of data you've got in your file system, and file system sizes, and yeah. So there's an ongoing issue with the metadata performance. So we're looking into that. We're sort of with the replication process, we're really hammering the metadata servers and sort of hitting the headroom on that. So we're looking at working closely with Intel and Dell and the Santos team to sort of look at improving that on a single metadata target, but also, as I say, there's a plan is to move to D&E at some stage and have multiple metadata targets to improve that performance.